Okay, the YouTube is live. Right. So there's Dr. Evans. Okay. All right. I guess we can start now. Okay. We have a bit of quorum, so we can start as well. Uh, all right. Gentle reminder for people from Nigeria. I know there's a bit of power outage issues there. So please, the YouTube stream is live right now. So before we proper kick off, let me just drop the link in here for you just now. Hey, Geoffrey, if you don't mind, you want to share with the NLT community from Nigeria the video link as well so that they don't miss out if their Zoom stream drops. I'll be grateful. Cheers, Geoffrey. Favor, you're there as well, so thank you very much. Okay, so let's get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Sanya Mondoh, and we are proud to bring to you CryptoMondays Caribbean and CryptoMondays Africa. Together, we're having the first joint webinar we're having together. And we have really special guests today. The webinar discussion today is on policy, Web3, and forensics. Like, how do they work together and what's the ground truth? So the ground truth is a military term that's literally like you have your ear on the ground to hear what's popping. Okay. Now with us, we have damn, I don't even know where to start. Like today, it's star-studded, but as Keniel always says, ladies first. So I'm gonna start off with my top left. To my top left, I have Cara Hennessy, who's with Provenance Compliance. All the panelists are going to give their own introduction, so I'm just recognizing them, and they'll do their own thing. To my middle, I have Adilah Holivay. And to the bottom, I have Professor Tonya Evans. And to my bottom right, I have Valencia Harkless. And to my top, we have Keniel Ledgister and Nick Furneaux. And we have the Larry King of Web3 himself, Redbord. And today we're going to have a little twist to our webinar because, like we have to recognize the OGs. And Ari being the Larry King himself, he's going to be co-host today. And because the discussions we have today, they're really sweet and we literally have to unpack them. And all the panelists have a special way or special experience in their respective fields. And Ari is going to help us get to the bottom of everybody's expertise. So members of the audience, thank you very much. And panelists, thank you very much. So Ari, I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm still going to be in the area to help with the initial questions as well.
Oh, you better be doing co-hosting role job with me here, Brian. No, but honestly, Brian, thank you so much for having me amongst this really amazing group of friends. I will point out the fact that you clearly only have very good-looking guys on in this group, right? Hair not needed to show up here and provide some expertise here today. I like that. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I know I'm seeing a trend here. Um, yeah, really excited to join you, and obviously so many friends here on the Zoom. I'm Ari Redbord. I'm the global head of policy at TRM Labs. I get to work with amazing people like Nick and others who are true experts in our space. Prior to joining TRM about 4 years ago, I spent about 11 years at the U.S. Department of Justice. I'm really focused on that intersection between national security and money laundering, what I call threat finance. So terrorist financing, sanctions, export control. I then spent about 2 years at the U.S. Treasury Department, again, working on those same issues, working to oversee the national security apparatus of the Treasury Department, OFAC, which is our sanctions regulator, FinCEN, which is our financial intelligence unit, and really excited to talk about all things regulation, compliance, illicit finance, stopping bad guys, Nick's new book, and anything else that comes to mind here today.
Thanks, Harry. So, Harry, before you take the mic officially from me, let's start off with Cara making her introductions, and then we can pass it across the room. Keniel, Nick, Val, Adilah, and Dr. Evans as well. And then, Harry, the mic comes back to you to kick off the session then.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone. Absolutely thrilled to be here. I'm saying, Brian, you mustn't be in the Caribbean wearing a jumper like that, right? You must be in snowy conditions like I am. I'm in Ireland, and
Yes,
I wish I
I'm
was
in
the
England
Caribbean
right
now.
now. No way this can work in the Caribbean.
No way, no way. Hi, folks. I'm absolutely thrilled and honored to be here tonight. It's a topic that I'm very, very passionate about, and so passionate about working in the blockchain space. The level of collaboration and collegiate, participation is just so fundamental to what we do. I'm a co-founder of Provenance Compliance Advisory for Digital Assets. We principally work, I kind of describe ourselves as a bridge. We work with crypto native entrepreneurs who are launching in a regulated space, launching VASP, launching tokenized funds, launching crypto funds. And then we also work with DGen institutionals, so asset managers, fund admins, law firms who are coming into the crypto space. We help them demystify the hype around crypto and help them effectively manage the risk around crypto. So many typologies, so many case studies, so many learnings. And for me, in our role as compliance professionals in combating financial crime, the power of blockchain and DLT to effectively and better manage that risk and ultimately achieve the objective of, combating financial crime, it's so much more powerful than operating in fiat. It's just I feel very passionate about sharing that message with everybody. So here to answer any questions and look forward to hearing from the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Cara. Keniel, please.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Good evening for those who are on the other side of the world. It is a pleasure to be here. Again, my name is Keniel Ledgister. When I'm stateside, I am a special agent for IRS criminal investigation, but I'm actually seated in Barbados right now. So yes, I do have on short sleeve. So as a IRS attaché sitting overseas in Barbados, I am a regional attaché. I covered the whole Caribbean with regards to anti-money laundering and all things financial crimes. I am the regional subject matter expert for everything financially related. It's a pleasure to be here as usual, part of the CMC team. So look forward to sharing my knowledge and working with you all.
Thank you, Keniel.
Short and sweet.
Nick.
Hello, everybody. Keniel, I'm going to be in St. Lucia for the whole of January and February. You should come down and have a rum. we should do
or
that.
Two. Or two, yes. Keep me posted.
Yeah. Nick Furneaux. I am a blockchain intelligence expert for TRM, and not even I know what that means. I'm also a board advisor for a company called Asset Reality here in the UK. Background was a digital forensics. I won't go all the way back, but digital forensics person. Started playing with crypto investigations in 2015, wrote a book, investigated about $21 billion worth of crypto assets between myself and my buddy Luke, which we think is about the most for any small team globally. Trained thousands of police officers and other investigators around the world before TRM came and lured us over, and just launched my latest book, There's No Such Thing as Crypto Crime, which was out 2 weeks ago. That's me.
Thank you, Nick. Val.
Hello, everyone. My name is Val. I am a senior fraud analyst for Chenega, well, for their subsidiary C2 Alaska. I do a lot of pig butchering, cryptocurrency triage for the SEC. Prior to that, I spent 10 years in asset forfeiture. I was part of one of the seizure teams on the very first Silk Road investigation. So that's kind of where I got my, curiosity to learn more about Web3. I do some fraud, criminal investigations for victims of cryptocurrency crime, and a lot of victim outreach.
Thank you, Val. Adilah.
Hello, everyone, and good evening to all. My name is Adilah Holivay. I am a crypto advisor for audits and also investigations. But outside of that, working in the space of blockchain technology, I work on behalf of DLBB, which is a blockchain group that I co-founded, and also I am one of the ambassadors for AWIC, which is Association for Women in Cryptocurrency. We try to do a lot of awareness around, what exactly cryptocurrency is. Not necessarily the investment perspective, but more or less the digital asset protections and also clarifications of tax implications and regulation implications. And also, I'm just a huge advocate. In fact, I'm working with some different advisory groups to actually help bring this into the mainstream. So that's kind of the work that I do, and that's what I do.
Thanks, Adilah. Professor Evans.
Hi, good day, everyone. I'm Professor Tonya Evans. I'm the founder and CEO of Advantage Evans FinTech Law Policy and Education Academy. I'm also a full tenured professor at Penn State Dickinson Law in Central Pennsylvania with a co-hire appointment at the Penn State Institute for Computational and Data Sciences. I focus on intellectual property and new technologies. I created the first blockchain, crypto, and law online certificate program at my previous institution, the author of a book that came out last year, Digital Money Demystified. And I serve on the board of directors for Digital Currency Group, or DCG, as well. And as a law professor, blockchain expert, consultant, policy advisor, particularly on the Hill, and I hope to do some more work here in the Commonwealth in Pennsylvania, because we know here in the States and certainly abroad, this is global technology that isn't beholden to borders, but we certainly have a lot of lessons about how to move forward. So I've dedicated my career now to exploring how emerging technologies like blockchain, crypto, and other Web3 technologies are reshaping industries and supporting professionals, lawyers, financial advisors, legacy leaders to upskill and reskill for the new economy. Grateful to be here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Evans. Ari, we're now back to you.
Love it. All right. And I'm going to hold you to jumping in here, Brian. I am co-hosting this with you, not hosting this alone.
Yeah, I'm here.
But good. I obviously just hearing the expertise in the room, I'm super excited, and I now understand why we need the time that we have today, because there's just so many different pieces, I think, to this larger puzzle. But Nick, I'm going to start with you. I mean, you literally wrote the book, and I used to be able to say wrote the book. Now I have to say wrote the books. But your newest one, which is a really extraordinary read, is called There's No Such Thing as Crypto Crime. Talk to me a little bit about that. And I think what I really love you to do is kind of set the scene. Like what are the sort of high level topics in the book, but also that sort of what you're thinking about overall when you think about sort of illicit activity within the crypto ecosystem.
Okay, yeah, I mean, broad question. The title of the book is unashamedly clickbait. Because obviously there are crimes that involve cryptocurrencies. The reason for that, actually, it came from a conference speech that I gave probably a dozen times during lockdown. Because one of the problems I was seeing, I was consulting with police forces all over the world, and they were all building crypto investigation teams. And there seemed to be a bit of an issue when something would happen, some crime would be committed, and it happened to involve Ethereum. So everyone would throw all of the evidence and intelligence in the air and give everything to the crypto people. And it's just really, really important to realize we know how to investigate frauds. We know how to investigate investment frauds. We know how to investigate pig butchering. All we're doing with the cryptocurrency side is just bringing in a new payment mechanism. That is all. And so we mustn't, as we say in England, throw the baby out with the bathwater, where we forget how to do all this stuff and just concentrate on the crypto side. So that was sort of the overall umbrella for the book. But it needed to be very different. Back in 2017-18, when I wrote Investigating Cryptocurrencies, I made a fundamental error. And that was thinking that it would be people like me that would investigate crypto-oriented crime, digital forensics people, because it had the word crypto in the name. So clearly it was going to be technical people doing the work. And we've just been proven to be wrong. It's financial investigators, compliance people, tax investigators, legislators, lawyers, and the list is endless. So our early teaching often would alienate the financial investigators at the back who had no idea what Python and batch files were as we were sort of writing discovery tools. And so we've had to really change our language to be able to teach people that investigate financially oriented crime to include an appropriate level of crypto knowledge in there as well. So that's the sort of the fundamental tenet of the book. So the first half is talking about the way crypto is used in different criminal categories. The sort of the role of commercial tools such as TRM Labs, who we represent, and of course others like Chainalysis and Elliptic and others. And then we look at the methodologies around track and trace in a way that hopefully is palatable for non-technical investigators as well as technical investigators. So that was the first thing. What's the second part of your question, Ari?
I think that's probably right. What I guess I'd follow up with, what are the maybe threat categories or the risks that as you were writing were the ones that you were hearing the most about from folks that you were interviewing, or the things that you just see on a regular basis? Because I think we're going to do a lot of that today. Keniel, I think I'll go to you next on sort of the work that you're doing. Val, you mentioned sort of the work the SEC is doing around scams. So maybe like set the scene a little bit with that, Nick.
Yeah, and Nick,
Yeah, I mean,
sorry, Nick, sorry
yeah, sorry, Brian.
to butt in as well for the end user, because I was having a discussion with Keniel and Adilah earlier on today, and we're talking about how there's a big FTX part 2 kind of thing happening in Barbados, you know. So what does that mean also for the locals, for the John Doe and the Jane Doe? What does it mean for them?
You know, right in the start of the new book, it says, can we all please remember the victims?
Right.
Because there is a risk that we get involved, we get into the technology, and we love the technology and the big stuff and the legislation. And I'm not saying there's not a role for that. But I am a very simple soul. I'm always super impressed, like with Tonya being a professor. I left school at 16. I have absolutely no qualifications in anything. I am a very simple investigator. And for me, that means focusing on the victim, which is why I love what Erin West is doing in just getting out of the big picture stuff and trying to think, who can we help? Who can we get money back to? And that's forming a lot of what I'm doing in conference speeches at the moment is, come on, everyone, let's remember the victim and try and get money back to them. So what are we seeing? Well, basically every criminal category, whether that be investment frauds, pig butchering, I hate that term. I think it's quite disrespectful, but romance scams and so on, all being done in exactly the same way they have been for years, but now we're seeing the funds being taken out in crypto and moved in crypto and so on. So nothing is changing. It's just crypto is being used as the method of payment.
Right. And that's when I think of the title of your book, right? We've talked about this for years, that there's no such thing as crypto crime, because as the crypto ecosystem grows, it's going to be used and is used today in the commission of every crime, right? You have terror financing in crypto, you have scams, you have child exploitation, you have, absolutely every crime is using cryptocurrency, just like it's using fiat currency, and it's sort of following the money. Keniel, in your role, and you kind of have a really interesting role in that you're seeing what agents are doing globally, but also sort of the cases that are coming to you ultimately, and folks are talking about. Talk a little bit about the work that you're doing and what you're seeing specifically out there.
Yeah, most definitely. And to reiterate what Nick is saying, replace crypto with money. Any type of financial scam that you could think of, right? It's ease of use with crypto right now. That's what it is, ease of use. So you have individuals that are able to leverage you, take advantage of you, but just much more quicker and globally. So specifically, a lot of my work, I cover the whole region, the Caribbean region, and I also get to see, since my agency, IRS Criminal Investigation, is so small, we do get to see the global perspective as what's going on. I do tend to kind of stay in my lane and stay in the Caribbean, but I do have an understanding that you name it, from terrorism finance, romance scams, name it, anything, tax evasion, even then, crypto is a vehicle for all financial crime at this point, which has given it a bad rep. Brian did touch on something that's near and dear to me, because it is, I've always say the Caribbean is always slow to take on and always hardest hit. So there was a scam that just is still developing and taking place. It's more like a media scam where companies alleging to give you a job and you have to enroll so many people. We call that traditional pyramid scheme, which we've seen now that's morphed itself into a crypto scheme as well, where the individuals were guaranteed a paycheck via crypto. So now again, that just mars or put a bad taste in anyone's mouth when it comes to crypto and what they're hearing pertains to crypto, because all they're going to remember is, oh, I didn't get my crypto. There was definitely a scam, and they're now associating the word crypto with the word scam again. So unfortunately, it's left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth.
Yeah, Keniel, so with the Caribbean region, that's something that's really deeply entrenched. So how do we go about it? And if Cara, if you could come in as well and help us, because you work with SEMA and them, the policymakers down there. So how do we move from people thinking blockchain is equals crypto, crypto is equal to scam, we don't want it, don't bring it here, do your own thing, we are fine.
Yeah.
How do we work around that?
I'm loving the perspective so far. It's so on the money. It's so on point. Like when Bernie made off with 65 billion, did we say ban fiat, ban cash? It's bad. No, it's the medium of exchange. It's the medium that was used to commit fraud. And, I think ultimately what really needs to happen, the expedience of crime via crypto is such that it's hard to keep up with. And I can't wait to hear more about the triage and working with victims, because it is very serious. And considering, crypto as a security, obviously, number one has to be consumer protection. I think right now in the Caribbean, the heaviest focus, rightly so, is on AML and KYC and there. But as the ecosystem develops, like we're seeing it all the time, as the typologies are developing, as the blockchain analytics are developing, ultimately we are going to be able to, you don't need a subpoena or a warrant to trace the assets. You don't need that. But the actual activity, the off-ramping and all of those situations will get more analytical, will get quicker, will get more effective. And I think that's super important. What I think is hugely, hugely important, and I actually think I think about this even from kind of school age, is educating people at different areas about scams, about pig butchering, what to look out for. Because people are on, let's say, Facebook, and they see something that they want to buy into, and they've got their crypto wallet, done, it's gone. And I think as well, there's a bit of education around, I was speaking to people recently who were hacked via, their exchange account. And there are things like, they expect an exchange account relationship to be like a traditional banking relationship. I lost my password. What do? Can you replace it? Can you replenish it? I got hacked. Call me. Why didn't you call me when, this transaction was about to happen? There's those expectations. So there's an awful lot of education in the space from, honestly, school age. And again, it's working more about human behaviors that use these mediums of exchange to perpetrate illicit activity and perpetrate crimes. It's the education and it's the studying of human behavior, like Nick was saying, studying the criminal activity rather than the technology, studying the groups and where they situate. But yeah, it's and again, I think the great thing about DLT is that the forensics, the typology, the AI on top of that as well will develop in the future, that we may actually find criminals in the future because it's advanced so much and you can't undo what you've done on chain, right? It's there forever.
Right. Ari, you
No,
have
keep
a
it moving.
question, or you want?
Go
Yeah,
for it.
because I have a question for you, actually.
Love it.
Right. So in terms of policy and dealing with governments and dealing with the victims, how does the policy making work, or the lobbying to bring in this? Because I know like TRM doesn't quite interact with the end user. It interacts with the governments and the institutions at a higher level. So what's the trickle down effect?
I think, look, I think what's interesting, and I think to Nick's point is, when Nick wrote his first book, we were in the really early days of this. I mean, Nick was one of a handful of people globally that had the tools and the training to investigate cryptocurrency related fraud and financial crime. I think when Nick wrote his second book, we're in this really interesting space where certainly every US federal law enforcement, but then globally, across the world have these specialized units, the virtual asset units, or that specialize in this. But it really is still a cadre of professionals that have the tools and the training to investigate these cases. But as the ecosystem grows, and it is really growing, I mean, have you seen this week and last week, right?
Yeah.
Every investigator globally is going to need access to these tools because there's no such thing as crypto crime, meaning crypto is in all crimes. And we're moving to that world. I think the problem is, and the challenge today is we're not quite in that world yet. And there are way too many of these scam cases for law enforcement to deal with today. So we've seen some great firms stand up to do some of this type of tracing services. We've seen some really terrible ones that are frauds in and of themselves that are re-victimizing folks. Our goal at TRM is to ensure that enough investigators, right, have access to our tools and training in order to go out and investigate these cases to make victims whole. But the reality is that's the biggest challenge today, is developing more and more law enforcement who have the tools, who have the training in order to do this. Because quite frankly, there has been this proliferation of scams and fraud. I mean, at TRM, we say there was about 12.5 billion in scams and fraud last year in the crypto ecosystem. That's just these types of cases, right? That is a huge number, and it's going to be lots and lots of people. So, right. So we're working with governments, we're working with the private sector to mitigate these risks, but it is still a huge challenge today because it really is still early days.
So what's the ideal outcome you're looking for? So if something, and Adilah, you could probably help with this, you and Dr. Evans and Val as well. So let's say I'm a lay user. It's my first time using a wallet. My assets are dissipated, let's say about £10,000. Who do I go to? Like what happens next? Because Ari, your tools are really sophisticated, and I have no clue who TRM Labs are. So who do I go to?
Dr.
Yeah,
Evans, go ahead
go
and
for it.
take on that, because given Dr. Evans' background in education, I think it's important to weigh in on that professional perspective that we can chime on to Val, and then I'll weigh in.
Okay.
What always makes, I mean, I think the point of this area being a wide foray in different aspects of law and business and technology, and that implicates different aspects of law enforcement. The first thing, and also the various regulatory bodies, depending upon where someone happens to be. So just as there are innumerable crimes, there are so many different jurisdictions, local, regional, and federal law enforcement that also, to your point, they don't even know where to start other than, you know, the local police officer, for example. Part of that education will be informing people of what regulatory bodies, but that also necessitates that people understand, are we dealing with a domestic situation? Are we dealing with estate planning? Are we dealing with something that's in the corporate environment? Does this happen across state lines? Does it involve minors? There's so many different areas of law that impact people's day-to-day, that part of, I feel like our responsibility in this industry is to start making the follow-up when crimes occur as easy as it is to create a wallet. Because if we are creating the technology to get in, but not the technology and the resources in order to adequately protect, because we talk so much about the regulatory bodies protecting, but it is the responsibility, I think, of the industry as well to educate about creating a wallet, but also even distinguishing between wallets and helping people get smarter. Particularly when you see the run-up of Bitcoin and the rising tide that lifts all boats, then we'll have more people, more new entrants into the space, knowing less, not only about the technology, but how to protect themselves as well. I have some other things to say about corporate protection, but since we're here on the personal side, I'll hand it to Adilah, or I don't remember the name that was coming
Val,
up.
go ahead, Val.
Well, first, I'll have my disclaimer: all views and opinions expressed are my own and do not reflect the views of my government agency, any agency that I've been a contractor for in the past. So, basically.
Val, I only want to hear views that are your own. No views that are not your own. No taking anyone else's views around here.
Right. No AI. No AI
Yeah.
here.
Touche.
No AI. Usually when I speak with the victim, I have a lot of victims hit me up on LinkedIn, and the first thing I tell them to do, is go down the list. Usually they're American. So I'm like IC3, chain abuse, local law enforcement. And it's heartbreaking, especially when it's such a low dollar amount. You said 10,000 pounds, usually it's not recoverable, and then it's like I have to explain it and why it's not recoverable. And that's when I start being, the forfeiture and seizure expert. The U.S. Attorney's Office ain't gonna take no dollar, low dollar amount. We can't do it as admin because it's cross-border, just a whole lot of logistics on low dollar amount crypto seizures or just crypto fraud. And I mean, they're frustrated. We're frustrated, because, right now there's like really just no remedy for a 10,000 pound, dollar, euro crypto seizure. You know what I mean?
I think this is the one thing I want to see change. I often tell this story about the 15 million pound loss by this lady in Spain, and we got her money back in 48 hours, and everyone loves the story. But I had a call on Friday from a guy who's lost £18,000. That's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money for the working class,
But I'm not going to find anyone who's going to look into that. We've got to change that picture, because actually, if he's been done for 18, there's another 100 of him.
Yeah.
And we need to make those connections, and they become big crimes.
But Nick, and literally everybody here, you can chime in. Yeah. Let me give you, based on that amount, let's use 20,000 pounds as a benchmark. Okay.
Well, you know what, Brian, before you start your story. So I did have one victim, I guess where they were in the process of getting the low dollar amount back. But it was because they were part of a large scale investigation with the FBI, and they were one of many victims. So, that's one of the cases where, they can get their money back because they're one of like 50 victims, with a big case, so then they can get attempt to get all of their money back, through asset forfeiture.
Right. Thank you, Val. So guys, you traverse international lines. This is a cross-border thing, Web3 and blockchain. So let's say somebody in Kenya, I come from Kenya, 20,000 pounds is like 3 million Kenya shillings. You can't tell me my value is too low, surely.
Yeah, and with crypto, you're banking a lot, the unbanked, right? As in you're dealing with the people who are moving into crypto because they're unbanked, and there's actually 7 million people in the US that are unbanked. Which is an interesting stat in itself. So yeah, absolutely. The threshold, and just sorry for jumping in here, but there was another question that you asked earlier on that I didn't address. There's policy level situations or issues that need to be addressed. We can't apply the same regulatory framework as pertains to the regulated financial services industry of traditional. It's different counterparties, it's different end customers, it's different end users, and protecting the customer is a completely different ballgame here. And as well, talking about scams and fraud and what, let's say you were asking about the Caribbean, what we can do better in terms of protecting, each regulated or each industry participant can do things like, auditing their own cryptocurrency security frameworks and having attestations that are like SOX or like ISOs that are speaking to your security standards, having internal, if a counterparty, loses on a scam, having escalation process within the industry, not just going to Val and having her figure out, where to go. There should be industry responsibilities for losses.
Okay. Thank you, Cara.
And that's where I want to come in.
Hold your finger there. Okay, Adilah, please.
I want to come in, and that's where the advisory begins, right? The advisory begins at the professional level, and it works its way down to the users. Why? Because we have rogue wallets, and what does that mean? See, I do wallet management services. Wallet management services particularly accounts for wallets that are being either utilized for illicit funds. We report those, but also what about the guy or the woman that decides to open up a wallet? Do they even know how to manage that wallet? When you are managing digital assets, you have a responsibility to even understand how you're going to manage that wallet. That's where we come in at, and that's industry professionalism and advisory services. And I can't just provide that to the whole world, right? We have to have many advocates and many other businesses and organizations willing to take on the opportunity to educate at that level. And then we trickle down to the user, which is basically telling them about their rights and how they can utilize the exchange to trade crypto. But the exchange is not responsible. That's the bigger problem, right? The exchange is not responsible for your wallet. You open the wallet, you utilize the wallet, you manage the wallet. That's not the exchange's responsibility. So having that education going through the door of what really wallet management and wallet hygiene really is, so that they won't engage in illicit activity. Because a lot of times I get a lot of people that don't even know they're involved in illicit activity. They don't even know it until they are, until it's all said and done. And then a lot of times you have people who are calling out those people with new wallets, and they're basically a mule to carry out the transaction or the event. So there's many different pieces to the puzzle that could be amplified if given the opportunity to educate about the advisory level of wallet management, wallet hygiene itself.
Right.
Thank you,
Adilah.
I'll jump in really quickly because we've spoken about the end user as an individual. And in addition to that, focusing on the corporate responsibility for those who are not the exchanges, but corporate leaders, the legacy C-suite folks, lawyers, financial folks have to adapt to handling complex cases involving blockchain technology, understand where evidence gathering begins and how it goes across jurisdictional challenges, financial professionals, using blockchain analytics tools that we continue to talk about today to conduct due diligence, monitor portfolio risks. These are all things in legacy finance. Their education is critically important as well. Relying on 20th century and early 21st century education is no longer sufficient, and it's not a nice to have and a nice to know, but a need to have and a need to know right now.
Actually, Brian, I had a really great one. Guy from Florida called me. He'd lost $250,000 in crypto. So he had a private wallet and he wanted to move it to Binance. And he couldn't do it. He was having some problems. So he went on a support forum and a person DM'd him and said, oh, I'm a Binance support person, so I'm going to help you. This is great. And they said, but we need to authenticate you first. So could you give us the first, third, and eighth word in your seed word phrase? And so he gave it to them because, of course, you do that, don't you? You phone the bank and they say your password, give me the first and the third and the eighth character. And they went, oh, that didn't work. Can you give us the second and the sixth and just socially engineered him out of his seed phrase? But this guy was a very sophisticated, intelligent investor. And goes back to what Adilah was saying, is that just a lack of knowledge of crypto at a fundamental level got him done out $250,000. So, I mean, we don't do that type of training, but end user training of people getting into this, absolutely vital. Sorry, it's a slight segue, but it's a great stuff.
Nick, what I can't believe up to this day is sophisticated users getting scammed. I still don't believe it. But Ari, back to you. That was segment 1, Ari. I don't even know what's going to happen in the next 2.
That was segment like 1 through 3, but we're definitely gonna no. We hit on a lot of really cool topics, and yeah, really excited to keep the conversation going.
Ari, before you jump into the next section, I just wanted to highlight your earlier on statistic. You said 12 billion of scams and fraud from crypto. This is Trim Labs. I had there was a conference with Experian that I just came off of last week, and they said 48 billion estimate yearly fraud loss due to bot scams. Some of these people we're talking to are bots.
Yeah.
A lot of the people, there's some overlap there, and I just wanted to call that number out because you think you're talking to a live person, you think there's a live person on the line collecting that data, that might be a bot too.
Yeah, it's really important. And I will say one thing that it's interesting. There was a time in this space a couple of years ago when you were talking about illicit finance that it was just these, like, what I think of as like these existential national security issues like North Korea hacks and ransomware. And now we're sort of moved into this other thing around scams and fraud. I think of them all, like, to some extent. And as this ecosystem grows, I think it's really important to figure out how do we mitigate these risks so that lawful users will keep using this technology. And the numbers are, it's really interesting trying to figure out what the numbers are in so many of these. IC3, I think Val mentioned earlier, puts it at about half of what we put it at. And we're hearing sort of like, you mentioned the bots and sort of the larger numbers. So it is figuring out these numbers, but at the end of the day, it's like, how do you stop bad actors from engaging with stuff? But it's a great call out. Next sort of set of questions, although, like, Brian promised me we'd be jumping around, and we are clearly jumping around for sure. Cara, maybe I'm going to start with you on this one, and Professor Evans would love to kind of get your perspective too, or maybe we kind of do two different perspectives here. Cara, maybe talk a little bit about how you're seeing policymakers in the conversations that you're in really think about how to regulate this technology. Feel free to break it down by jurisdiction or sort of just talk about some of the conversations you're having there.
Yeah, okay. So just out of context, and I'll take perhaps, VASPs as an example, VASP/CASPs, MiCA in Europe. So just in terms of my context.
Do you want to break down those abbreviations for the lay people who don't understand them, please?
Okay, so apologies. Virtual asset service providers. So if we take virtual asset service providers, they are like custodians, exchanges, OTC trading, DeFi lending, other virtual asset regulated products in the market. And to date, we have experience in the Cayman Islands, Bahamas, BVI, Bermuda, Ireland, and Africa. So we've worked in Nigeria and South Africa with digital asset regulated entities over there. And what I would say that is so difficult, and everybody here has kind of touched upon, I think Dr. Tonya in particular, is you have this, blockchain is borderless, but here we are dealing with these regulatory nuances, even in Europe, where we have one framework for digital assets. It has, like in the US, I guess you have federal and state. In Europe, we have, in every country, we have our own legal frameworks. So, for example, in Germany, they don't treat crypto as a security. They don't recognize it as a security. With MiCA now, we're seeing the likes of Coinbase in October announce they're going to start delisting stablecoin if they are not compliant with MiCA regulations, so markets and crypto asset regulations. That's a significant move in the space. And like Circle are, going through having an e-money license, and you have to go through a full authorization process. We're not yet sure about Tether. What I will say in the Caribbean, and my deep experiences in the Cayman Islands has been very progressive. We've gone through operational cycles of travel rule return. We've gone through operational cycles of AML returns. We've gone through SEMA desktop audit reviews of VASPs. And all of those VASPs are coming to the table committed to creating regulatory frameworks. With VASP registration, the particular focus right now is AML, but in Europe, we're already looking at, by the end of the year, for MiCA, VASPs have to publish disclosures on their website about ESG, about energy, and they're very, very specific disclosures that they're going to be measured upon. They have to answer about how they're going to perform for digital operational resilience. And all these other elements. Consumer protection within Europe is absolutely like up there and paramount. I'm loving this discussion about the facets of understanding and interpretation and the differences and the nuances to having crypto, the power that's there, the forensic ability that's there to help, regulatory enforcement and financial intelligence be more effective. But I think a lot of these scams and fraud prevention has to happen off chain. We have to understand who these groups are, where are they coming from, what websites are they filtering, what social media channels. I've seen some really illicit frauds, with regulated entities where they're hacking a Telegram account, and then they're still doing a micro transaction as a test, and then the scammed wallet is sending the micro transaction to the real wallet. The real owner is confirming received, so then the full rest of the transaction is sent across and it's gone. There's so many behaviors that we need. Again, you can't come back. There's so much about education that we need to learn and train. And another thing actually that I will say, Ari, in terms of the blockchain analytics are so fantastic, but you also need, and it's been said already, financial compliance, experienced people to look at the activity, to take the on-chain analytics results, but then understand what's the directional activity. Is this wallet tainted as high risk because 6 hops over it, Tornado Cash was airdropped pre-sanction, et cetera, understanding that. But also, for example, I've seen activity on chain where I'm like, ooh, that looks like, typical layering procedures. It looks like that activity looks dodgy to me, sorry for lack of a better term. And then I go to speak to the business about it, and they're like, no, that's typical activity here for our protocol. And I'm like, okay, so there's new business understandings that we have to get behind to build different typologies to say that's normal activity, that in out on a daily basis is normal for that business. It's not in a regulated TradFi situation. So yeah, so policy, it's so difficult, right? Blockchain is borderless, but regulatory frameworks are not. But in my experience, all of the regulators are showing great aptitude, great openness, great willingness to come to the table and understand better. And in fairness to them, they're having to play a lot of catch up. But anybody I'm seeing coming from the crypto native space is really willing to work with the regulators, really also open to educating them, sitting down saying, let me show you how this works, and in a really collegiate, collaborative way. Again, public-private participation, it's paramount for policy.
Thank you so much. And we're going to stick with policy. Actually, Professor Evans, I got something for you, but hold on 1 second. I'm going to go to Val real quick. Val, talk me through sort of the way you're thinking about regulation in the US today, and if you're seeing some sort of winds of change potentially.
No, not in the near future. I feel, and this is of course my opinion, that that the government doesn't feel like they don't know what direction to go, like as far as regulation and who's going to do what, because we have, the SEC and the CFTC, like handling crypto, different cryptocurrencies or digital currencies. So I mean, I think it's going to take some time before we get some regulation or some definitive answer on which way we're going to go as far as the regulatory aspect and who's going to be pursuing the crime. Because I think right now, the FBI and the Secret Service do the bulk of the cryptocurrency investigations. So I'm not hearing anything. I'm not sure what's going to happen in the future.
Got it. Yeah, I see this as a couple different components, right? You have, I think what you're talking about, which is kind of the anti-money laundering piece, which so many of us are in that space today. And what people don't realize when they talk about legal clarity in the United States is this is one issue there's actually pretty clear guidance today, right? If you are a VASP, as Cara said, if you're a virtual asset service provider, if you do crypto services, you're an exchange, you're a broker, you're a custodian, you're a ATM issuer, you have AML obligations today. You're a money service business. Hard stop. You're regulated by FinCEN, the Financial Intelligence Unit, under the Bank Secrecy Act. It's clear. But there's this other conversation that's been going on in the United States for a long time, and that is who's going to regulate the space, which is kind of what Val was getting at in terms of, is it the SEC? Is it the CFTC? Are these securities? Are they commodities? Are they something else altogether? And I'm hopeful, as folks who know me know that I'm often hopeful, but particularly hopeful in this moment because I think we have, based on like sort of the election and sort of what's happening in the United States, I think we are more likely to see a market structure bill, right, that actually lays out when the SEC should be involved, when the CFTC should be involved, in addition to stablecoin regulation or legislation in the next year or so. The government, as Val said, does not move quickly. But I think because of what we're seeing in the change of administrations, particularly Congress, right, there was this sense of like, well, if Trump wins, it's going to be one way. If Harris wins, it's going to be another way. I don't think anyone realized, but what's actually much more important is Congress. And I think we probably have a Congress now that is going to have a little bit more consensus around whether to pass this kind of legislation. So this is like a good segue, unless anyone wants to jump in, because what I wanted to ask Professor Evans around about were kind of like the pressing legal issues, right? I consider there be like a policy conversation, an AML, investigations, law enforcement conversation that I'm going to get to Keniel with in a moment. But there's also this really interesting legal conversation. I think some of the most interesting issues in our space are the legal issues. Professor Evans, like when you're thinking about like law and policy, what are the really sort of interesting cutting edge issues that you're thinking about today in the space?
Well, you stole quite a bit of my thunder there in the lead up. And so I've written a lot about it for Forbes as a contributor throughout through the election, and kind of um, talking about what the pivot might have been from Vice President Harris. And I was a member of Crypto for Harris to really push a potential incoming administration in that regard, and covering a lot on the Trump side, as well as kind of pivoting away from Bitcoin as a scam to make Bitcoin great again. And the implications of the unbelievable amount of money coming from our industry here in the United States to support a different position. Given Choke Point 2.0, I testified before Congress, the House Financial Services Subcommittee on Digital Assets last year, and some things here in Pennsylvania.
Well, let me stop you right there. I'm gonna play Brian's role for a second, because I would love you to sort of talk a little bit more about that specifically. Like, I'm not sure everyone on the call would know about Operation Choke Point and sort of the work you were doing around that.
So under the Obama administration, there was a formal policy called Choke Point 1.0 that focused on predatory lending and some other areas that were deemed to be very harmful for consumers, for not really investors, but certainly consumers, in terms of the astronomical amount of money with predatory lending, payday loans, et cetera. That policy was ultimately struck down. But aspects of it were captured actually at the end of the first Trump presidency, leading into the Biden administration as well, where we don't have a formal policy on the books that said choke off all banking access from crypto, but in fact, that is what appeared to be the case. And not just for banking, but across the board. You have some fantastic companies. We have portfolio companies at DCG that have been impacted. I have personally been impacted. It makes me think of trailblazers like Caitlin Long, who certainly was impacted. And it really set the United States back. I think crypto is one of those areas that truly is bipartisan. That was not the case, and that was not the way that it was used under the Biden administration, despite my support for other policies out of that administration. So where did we find ourselves? We found ourselves here in the ramp up to the election, where Fair Shake and Stand With Crypto and other initiatives were pouring millions and millions and millions of dollars in for lobbying efforts and for super PAC financing of so many of the commercials we saw, actually having nothing to do with crypto, but really moving the needle. And to your point, Ari, changing the landscape of United States politics, not just with the incoming administration, very pro-crypto for the second branch of government, but primarily the first branch of government, as you mentioned, where we will, for the first time, have the most pro-crypto first branch in Congress that we've ever seen. It is not politically expedient to be counter to crypto, and crypto has made that clear. And so I think that we will actually see a dramatic ramp up to some type of market stability there. We'll see stablecoin legislation this next 6 to 8 months in particular, and certainly that first year. We look at the first 180 days, and I think we'll absolutely see a change for the industry in particular.
Sorry, I have a question. In terms of this whole pro-crypto, and something we try to steer away from is this whole crypto bros vibe. What does this mean for utility? The whole Trump presidency and the whole Congress being, open to this whole crypto vibe, but there's much more beyond crypto, Professor Evans. So what does this mean for other projects that are utility based and Web3, the Web3 revolution beyond just trading? Because not everybody is involved in Wall Street, for instance.
I'm concerned that, intentionally or unintentionally, that the ecosystem will start to replicate some of the systemic ills that move people away from the intermediaries that might serve as gatekeepers. One of the biggest gatekeepers right now is actually a lack of education, but in the interim, those who are well-moneyed and knowledgeable about the space will continue to move further, while others will fall victim to fear, uncertainty, and doubt, otherwise known as FUD, attaching the aspect of crime with crypto, thinking that it's somehow cryptic instead of cryptography to be helpful. Those who may have taken a different position in terms of their vote or their choice may see the new face of crypto as being attached to stakes and education and gold watches and say that's absolutely a scam and I want nothing to do with it. And although anything involving the allocation of resources and empowering those to move resources is deeply political, the idea of this underlying technology should not be partisan. And so the work really should be around bipartisan conversations that give people enough information to make good choices, and for this to truly be people-powered money and the ecosystem. So if someone never invests, they still have opportunities to build the infrastructure and the ecosystem, which I think is far more lucrative and valuable going forward.
I was going to weigh in because there is still an elephant in the room. And I'm not sure if anybody's been having these conversations, so I wanted to bring it out to everybody. The elephant in the room is that we have a trade, we're getting ready to foresee trade wars, perhaps, and tariffs in this country. Now, a lot of times, right now, we're utilizing currencies through different countries. Their respective domestic currencies to do trade with. We have the opportunity to utilize cryptocurrency for trade today in our prospective regions in order to still be able to keep up with the trading demands. But then we also have tariffs coming in between that. So I guess the elephant to me is the ability to be able to utilize cryptocurrency. I'm talking about for our organizational purposes, supply chain, to be able to still keep business moving. Has yet to be addressed yet with our United States Congress, but I know that it's being addressed overseas with BRICS. So to me, that's a huge elephant. That's a huge opportunity that no one is even speaking about, that you're going to hear about live today on this announcement, because this is a huge responsibility that we have to the people who still depend on their supply chains to be able to run and operate businesses, and also keep the proper communication with respective non-sanctioned countries that still depend on our dollars to get to them. I know there's been conversations about CBDCs at the level of the IMF. So what does everybody think about that? Because I feel that is the impeding elephant in the room. We're getting ready to foresee tariffs. We're getting ready to really think about how we're going to trade with countries that we depend on the goods to come in. And I know Africa's on the line, and I know a lot of other countries are on the line. So how are we going to manage that? Because that to me is a really big risk if we don't get on board with getting proper risk protocols in place to be able to exchange this currency in appropriate manners. We have trade on the line. We have, just our very, our very conduction of business on the line at this point.
Ari, back to you. Thanks, Adilah, for that. Oh, and I have to mention, Keniel just briefly dropped off to attend to an emergency. He's coming back shortly, but conversation continues.
I never like it when law enforcement has to jump off emergency. That always makes me nervous. We'll get the download when he comes back. On here. But no, I really appreciate that last comment. And look, I was in the U.S. federal government for 15 years, right? I do look at it through that lens, for better or worse. And all of those issues over the last 100 years have been solved through the US dollar. And the question is whether or not that will sort of continue. When I'm having this discussion with policymakers, I've testified to this issue on Capitol Hill in the US. I often point to the fact that 99% of fiat-backed stablecoins are in US dollars, which to me is a tremendous opportunity globally to, from not just a soft power perspective, but to have continued adoption of US dollars and the use of US dollars for global trade. I understand why Russia and Iran would want to do trade in other currencies like gold-backed stablecoins that they've, talked about, why, the digital yuan would be something interesting in certain African countries where China is very invested. So it's all kinds of interesting geopolitical issues that this all raises, which we probably will not solve in the next 59 minutes, but
Yeah.
I'm always game to try. But no, I think these are really, really important issues. And when we think about the really big national security or the global security issues, this question of currency, dollar dominance, BRICS, all these are really, really interesting issues and important. And frankly, we probably don't talk about them enough compared to the other threats that we talk about. So I think really well articulated. And you're nodding, so that means you kind of think what I'm saying is okay.
I think what you're saying is right on the money. I mean, I just feel crypto, blockchain, all of these keywords, we throw them out even to the layman. They don't really get it, right? But they're going to understand trade. They're going to understand what keeps the business running. They're going to understand that if they don't understand this technology, they're going to get behind. This is what I've been driving home to a lot of the people that I've been helping to not just get on board with the technology, but just to understand from an industry perspective how they can leverage it. There's a huge opportunity to leverage this, but then at the same time, there's huge problems that we have to solve in order for adoption to go across the globe. And I like what you said there.
It's interesting.
Cara, you just came off mute, which usually means to me that you've got something to dive in here.
Just something tiny, but I do think it is such an opportunity for the US. And we see, say, for example, people in Africa choosing to be paid salaries in USDT. They want to peg, they're getting into crypto so they can get into so they can peg to the US dollar, right? So they're choosing to access the medium of crypto so they can peg to the dollar. It is huge. There's so many nuances to it, but yeah, huge.
But Ari, before we segue into the next segment, you and Nick have experience within Europe and the UK as well, because you have presence in the UK and Europe. In terms of policy, what are you seeing? Where do you think we're headed?
Control.
Nick, I'm happy to have you kick that off. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, control and more control. It's a shame, actually, if you remember what Bitcoin was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And of course, none of the governments can let Bitcoin be what it was supposed to be. Remember what happened when Facebook tried to start a cryptocurrency?
Yeah.
And all the governments went bonkers because if every Bitcoin user had changed $10 worth into, I can't remember what the coin was called, it would have been the most powerful currency in the world with no governmental control. So the reality is that no government, I don't mean this overtly negatively, because we do need financial control fundamentally, but it is a shame that the whole concept of Satoshi, he, she, they, that's not a gender comment, by the way. That's just, we don't know if it's a he or she or a they. Satoshi Nakamoto, was to get away, but because as in the very first block, it was the Times news article because of the bailing out of the banks by the UK government yet again. And Bitcoin shouldn't have a dollar value. Bitcoin should just be a Bitcoin, and that's what it should remain. But the reality is it's becoming more and more powerful, more and more used. And so the governments are going to have to, and rightly, bring in control. And the best way is to have pegged currencies to the US dollar and so on and so forth. So I think the future just brings more control, which will make cryptocurrencies more usable. But sort of sadly, if I put that hat on, take us away from the whole point of what they were meant to be originally.
Yeah, and Nick, how does it sit aside with CBDCs? Because Europe is really pushing the digital euro agenda, and the UK kind of had the digital pound. I don't know whether there's a digital CBDC project in America as well. But so where are all these things going to sit alongside each other?
I think that, the problem is that the sort of the crypto Wild West, as we sort of see it at the moment, is going to formalize. And it's everything around it is going to be more formulaic. The concept of a digital pound and a digital euro, if you think about it, it's a bit of a misnomer. I mean, when was the last time you paid anything in your fiat currency not digitally? I mean, I did a presentation at the Serious and Organized Crime Exchange last week, and I do a little example of what is a cryptocurrency, and I use a £20 note because it says on it, I, the Bank of England, promise to pay the bearer the sum of £20. And I always ask the question, what would they pay you with? Because they would just give you another £20, wouldn't they? Because we're not based on the gold standard anymore. We're just based on fiscal policy, which, after all my reading and research, seems to mean whatever the government wants it to mean. So I think things like the digital currencies and the digital sort of digital pound, digital euro, it's a bit gimmicky. I think I don't see the fundamental purpose of it other than to increase governmental control.
Right.
I think there's probably two buckets to your question. It's a really good question. And one is sort of like what's happening in the UK and Europe around sort of regulation today. And I think the reality is like all those things that Professor Evans and I were talking about, like, are we going to get in the US, right? Market structure, legal clarity, more or less exists in the EU today with MiCA. Really across the 37 member bloc, you have pretty consistent regulation today, right? If you get a license in Germany, that license is passportable to France or Portugal or really across the continent. So if you're Coinbase or Circle or Binance or any crypto business, you pretty much know the speed limit in Europe today. And that's not quite as true in the UK, but it's getting there. And I think over the next few months, we're actually going to see a lot more clarity out of the UK too. So like the reality is that they're already ahead of where we're going in the US. I do believe now with sort of like the congressional situation that could change pretty quickly. And when I talk to friends who are policymakers in the EU, they are all of a sudden concerned that what they thought was a business advantage about a month ago is less of a business advantage today. And that's a really interesting conversation. I'm going to Brussels next week for these kinds of conversations. And it's going to be so different than the conversations I had this time last year, I think. And that's going to be really, really interesting. The CBDC thing is always a really interesting one, right? It's because of the digital yuan in China, it's become red meat for sort of privacy type of issues. I think we could build probably a digital euro, a digital dollar that bakes in privacy controls using the technology, makes it more like digital cash. I think there's probably a lot we could do. I think it could be better payment rails. I think, but right now, while the Fed has been talking about a digital dollar for a long time, that is going to be off the table in this new administration. There's no interest in that. There's a lot of concern around the sort of privacy issues and government surveillance that Nick kind of threw out there. So there's no hope for a digital dollar anytime soon. And I think that's fine. Like I said, we have stable coins, we have cryptocurrencies. There's a lot. We have fiat. There's a lot of choice there today. Adilah, you just
Oh, I just wanted to say, consensus happened 2024 in May. I was in a closed panel room discussion about CBDCs, and they did, after going around the room and speaking to a lot of different economists and things of that nature about this problem, they arrived that there would be no privacy if we were to utilize CBDCs, which is like we were saying earlier, the whole basis of crypto is for some anonymity, and privacy, and also to be decentralized from the banks. But with that being said, the IMF did come out with some constructive feedback about how they intend to implement CBDCs. I don't know if it's quite really off of the table. However, I know that there's having discussions about it.
Yeah, no, well said. I'm very upset that you didn't go running with me in Austin at Consensus there in the last, in the spring. But we'll get you next year for sure.
I'll be
Brian,
in Toronto.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll be in Toronto. Awesome. We'll do that.
Yeah,
Brian, what do you got?
Okay, so I think now we have to move into the next segment, which is current affairs and future policy directions. And as co-host, I'll let you go first.
You're gonna let me go first. What am I talking about?
Okay, let me help you then.
All right.
All right. Let's bring it back home, yeah.
Yep.
I would like us to discuss, current affairs, Bitcoin. What's happening with Bitcoin? Like this is now the less intense part of the discussion. But before we discuss Bitcoin and all that, also let's discuss current trends like the pig butchering thing in proper depth. And Nick, if you could start us off with basically like, the whole crypto crime essence in its current shape and form now, like what people should look out for, like just basic tips and tricks basically, and then we can discuss Bitcoin agendas and all that.
So are you asking for information for an end user? Is
Yeah,
that what we're looking at, what we're
yeah,
talking about?
yeah.
It's sort of back to the title of the book, actually. All of the normal things that we teach people to watch out for scams and frauds, like don't give people information over the phone, really simple stuff. It is exactly the same. So we had a lady on the phone just a few weeks ago, a dear woman. I guess she must be about my age, sort of mid-50s, something like that. And she's been connected with a Ukrainian soldier. And then he got injured. It was terrible. But he couldn't afford proper body armor. But because he's fighting at the front, he can't receive normal bank transfers because there's no banks. I mean, that seems reasonable, doesn't it? So the only way he can do this is in crypto, and can you help me? And the problem is with things like pig butchering, romance scams. It's why I don't like the term pig butchering, actually, because it undervalues or devalues the role of the emotions that are involved. These people are not just defrauded financially, they are often defrauded emotionally. And I sat with a woman about 6 months ago who I laid out all the evidence that she was being scammed, and she still sent him money the next day because she'd fallen in love with him. And it's why I don't like pig butchering, because I just feel it downplays it. So what we don't want to be doing is trying to teach people too much complexity to avoid frauds and scams. We wanted to teach them all the basic stuff. Double check what you're told. Don't give people information over the phone. All those little things, they just relate into crypto-oriented crime as well. I could really rattle on about
Yeah.
this. But this is why I love what Erin's doing. Again, I mentioned this earlier, focusing on the victim, because I really feel for those that are taken in by romance scams. Eventually, it really upsets me because it's not just money that's lost.
What's so interesting, and just to put a point on Nick's the terminology, it's really become kind of an interesting thing in and of itself, right? So my former colleagues at the Department of Justice agree with Nick. If you go to any kind of conversation with them, there's no mention of that romance scams, or there's another sort of there's a couple different phrasings of this. Erin would actually disagree because as someone who I think is more of a crusader in the space, wants to shock people with the terminology, right? Wants people to sort of like take away that like visceral feeling that you get when you say that term. So it's just an interesting like different ways to kind of address very much trying to get the same problem, the same outcome, right? To help victims ultimately, but kind of an interesting piece to all of this.
I think Ari, it's whether if you're talking to a victim, you're not going to say you've been pig butchered. But when you're speaking to Congress,
definitely.
or someone, and you need people to sit up and take notice, then slaughtering animals is a pretty good way of doing it. It is that different semantics depending on who your audience is. And Erin is quite right, because she has this large audience that she's trying to make sit up and take notice. I completely agree with you.
And with that being said, I think we're bringing into, how you bring it into the daytime effort of bringing it home to Americans or overseas, bringing this aspect that a lot of times people don't realize that they're involved even in a pig butchering scam. the way that Erin is explaining it, and she's bringing it to Dateline and different opportunities of bringing it home to people as they are with their daily activities, is helping them to also do some counterintelligence. And when they get approached about a job, or when they get approached about opportunity, it helps them to understand it might be pig butchering, because it looks, it smells, it is, right? But with that being said, I just feel overall there's still a number of people who are educated, as we spoke about earlier, that are still being frauded. And I think that is the work, not just of an individual on a cell phone in a remote place. I think that's the work of a bot, because that's what the bots are doing, and that's why I talked about the bots earlier. I think we're dealing with three opportunities here. One is the individual. The second is the actual the AI aspect, because all they're doing is taking that pattern and replicating it and coding it and programming it to, reach the person who basically matches their credentials of the victim that they're trying to get. And then also the scam in itself, end result. It's like a full onslaught of organized crime, but it's not just coming from an individual anymore. It's coming from an individual that's receptive to different technologies.
Okay, thanks, Adilah. Ari, before I come back to you and Dr. Evans and Cara, Nick has to step away shortly. He has something to attend to. Nick, I hope it's not another emergency like Keniel. But
it's just, unfortunately, it's mid-evening here, and I have a complicated family situation here. So
that's fine.
I promised that I would be away.
That's fine. So do you want to give us like your last takeaway or wrap up kind of thing, and then the rest of us can, tidy up into your point as we also go towards wrapping up as well?
Yeah, actually, I would like to thank everybody on the panel. I don't know everybody, though some of the names like Cara are very familiar to me. And I've really enjoyed listening to those points, and in many ways I would love to pick up and continue some of the other things that we've been talking about. But I think if there's anything I could just come back to is, no matter where we're working, whether it's legislative, whether we're working with victims, whether we're working corporately, whether let's remember the victims, and let's ultimately look for ways by which we can make restitution to them. That's the way by which we can use our powers for good.
Thanks, Nick. And where can we get your book?
Oh, just Amazon. It's Kindle. I think Audible's coming out. They've had an actor record the Audible. I don't think they wanted some guy with a Southwest British accent recording it. So there will be an Audible as well. But yeah, pretty much anywhere you can pick up a book, I guess.
Thank you so much for your time, Nick. Have a
Thank you all. Lovely to see you all. Sorry, I have to step away.
All right.
Cheers.
All right. Okay, Ari, back to you.
Terrific. We kind of talked about the pig butchering piece.
Yeah.
But would love to also sort of, I think you sort of mentioned talking more about market dynamics and what's happening right now, and sort of whether or not, what role policy particularly plays here. Please feel free, folks should just jump in on this one.
Yeah.
It's been a very interesting few weeks. Professor, where's your head at in all this?
This year has been it's been a head turner, not a scratcher. It's like 180 degrees, and maybe it'll come back around. But I mean, if you remember a time, long time ago in January of 2024, when spot Bitcoin ETFs came on the scene, begrudgingly from the Securities and Exchange Commission after losing a battle in federal court to move forward. I now hear about more futures coming online, other cryptocurrencies that are falling in the category of commodities, but wrapped in this regulated wrapper that will become more in vogue, and the market dynamics will determine what happens with that, to be sure. But the rise of crypto ETPs, all those exchange traded products, increased institutional adoption of crypto assets, boards of directors starting to look at what allocation, if any, will appear on the books as well. We have more and more charities, charitable organizations accepting crypto donations, and even those funds. It makes me think of a story I did. Ari, I think it's down in Florida where a pension fund, we start hearing about state pension funds that are now looking into investing in, at a minimum, Bitcoin. These are really, really exciting times that forget 10 years ago, certainly forget January 2009. We weren't talking about this last year. When you think about 2021 and 2022 coming out of the crypto contagion years and the collapse of FTX, I don't even feel like we should call it a collapse. The fraud that was, had reverberating effects in the industry. We've come a long way. With these institutional developments, I think that reflects a growing confidence in the legitimacy, quote unquote, of the digital asset space. And I still want to put in a strong note to professionals who need to be in place to support folks, both at the institutional level, the government level, and end users as well. It was the reason that back in 2017, I didn't know about this magic internet money, but I had a responsibility as a lawyer, as a professor, and certainly I was an associate dean as well, to make sure the next wave of lawyers was going to be conversant in the space. That time is now. So when we talk about these market trends, the ETFs, the crime surge that comes with any honeypot, when we think about cross-border fraud and the ability and the need for policy advisors, policymakers, legislators to be involved, corporate responsibility is at even higher of a pitch. Corporate leaders, lawyers staying on top of AML regs and know your customer and how all of these things are changing. And then finally, with financial professionals really leaning into due diligence, crypto investment opportunities, leveraging the tools that we have, certainly TRM labs, elliptic, Chainalysis, to ensure that assets aren't tied to criminal activity. And the diversification, final point, of portfolios, I think, is something that estate planners are going to have to revisit. One of the areas that I focused on in my practice for 10 years before I even started teaching was in the estate planning and administration space, and talking about fiduciary responsibility and portfolio allocation and risk. And it certainly was a risk to have crypto there. And now it's a risk not to. I think it will be interesting to see conversations evolve in that space in 2025 and beyond about the allocation of risk and managing it, and whether it is contrary to fiduciary duty to have at least some exposure in this area. So I find it really, really fascinating.
That's amazing. Other folks?
May I just, thank you, that was amazing. I cannot follow that. But may I just revisit the previous point just on pig butchering? I just had a thought, as in what a great statistic to understand would be if, you know, the way with traditional banking, there's so much friction now, friction that we have with gratitude to, you know, I need to transfer, let's say I need to transfer €5,000 to somebody in my Bank of Ireland account, and I can only transfer 1,000 on the day, and I get asked 3 times, are you sure you want to make this transfer? Are you sure you want to set up this counterparty? Then you to MFA, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a number of friction points that get me to stop and think, should I make this transaction, or have I put in the right details, et cetera, et cetera. I would love to know if it's possible to track the level of scam kind of saving those kind of frictions have, you know, created or contributed towards. And is there similar that the protocols themselves could put in place in terms of, you know, some kind of friction to stop the immediacy of interactions? I don't know, but it was just something that I thought about. But and to the later point, in terms of the current markets, the one thing we'll say is that from our experience, we're seeing a lot of activity now opening up, or in the past 2 years, for private wallet subscriptions into regulated funds. So previously you had situations where private wallets would not be accepted by regulated funds. Now, because of the evolution of the likes of TRM and how reliable, robust, and you know, scientific and legible for the end user who is not a technologist, who is a compliance or financial risk expert, how much we can use them and utilize them and speak to the AML KYC standards and translate them for the regulator in a language they will understand. We're seeing a lot more activity there, which is, you know, interesting and great, because you obviously, a lot of crypto natives want to diversify into regulated products. And there is, again, going back to custody issue, there's a custody concentration risk that is prevalent. You know, that has to be considered and recognized, because that is there, and the custodian need to take that seriously and have their crypto security standards like up here and regularly tested and all the rest of it. And also we're seeing, you know, moves to tokenization. And the one thing I would caution about tokenization is, and in you know, to both Ari and Dr. Tonya's points, we're seeing rapid evolution now, but some of it is a bit of hype, right? Let's get into tokenization. What is your business case for tokenization? Just because what did somebody say earlier on, FUD? Is that how it is? FUD? You don't want to lead with that. Why are you going into tokenization? How is it going to affect the ecosystem? You're going to knock out certain counterparties like depository, custodian, fund admin, et cetera, et cetera. What are the actual benefits to your investors of going the tokenization route and planning out a roadmap, maybe just one share class tokenizing first, and et cetera. So I think we'll see rush again to the risk. Be careful of the counterparties you interact with, because you have a lot of traditional asset managers who are used to all their various counterparties, but now they're dealing with new counterparties, like new counterparties that have appeared in the last 2 years who will tokenize your issuance and et cetera, but they're new. So looking at the due diligence on them, doing an appropriate level of due diligence, real due diligence on who they are, where they've come from, what are their white papers, et cetera, et cetera.
They're great points. Yep, Adilah.
And I'll just close out my closing remarks with going back to the victim. Services like wallet management services is a service that I do in partnership with Bitwave. And if anyone doesn't know about Bitwave, that is a accounting partner, kind of like the QuickBooks of cryptocurrency, that kind of helps compliance from an aspect of ensuring, again, your wallet and your transactions are matching. We have something happening in the United States now called the Safe Harbor Safe Harbor provision. And what that provision is doing now, they're tracing to the wallet and the transaction. The wallet and the transaction has to triangulate. It's no more just give us all your transactions and we'll go through them. It doesn't work like that anymore. So for the user of these technologies, it's very important that they understand how not to be victimized by understanding picturing and different scams, but then also how to really open in a wallet and maintain and manage a wallet properly with its proper hygiene, so that people can be able to file taxes, so that people will be able to contribute to the ecosystem without being penalized. And that's what I'll say.
Yeah, Val, and then Ari, after Val, I would like you to take us through like your successes as well, because we've had a really deep conversation today around the bad, but I know I follow your posts and I know their successes as well, you know, so Val, please, and then Ari, like bring some
successes. Well, you know, I wanted to piggyback off of Nick before he went off. When he was talking about the victims, and this is more just of a comment, you know, or just a thinking out loud. I was at a recent FINRA conference, and they were talking about, you know, how all of the community outreach, or, you know, all of the victim outreach, you know, they send out all these emails and only a very small percentage, you know, of the people even open the email. So, I mean, and even for like, if a victim contacted me recently, you know, she was like, well, am I being pig butchered? And I was like, yeah. She was like, but, you know, well, what if it's not, you know? And I was like, I'm pretty sure this is a scam, you know? So like, just talk, you know, going back to what he was saying, it's like, you can tell these people or some of the victims, all day long that they're being scammed, that they don't want to believe they're being scammed. And part of my frustration is it's like, I guess we haven't figured out how to get through to those people, because I feel like we gotta like take a social engineering class, just to get through to those people and like do some kind of mental gymnastics to be like, okay, so now you believe you're, being scammed. So right now for me, that's my biggest my biggest frustration is I feel like some of the people who come to me they don't feel like they're being scammed, and it's like I have to tell them, or send them news clippings or whatever, but like, see, it happened to this person, so like this is a scam, and then they're like, it's not a scam. I'm like, okay. So anyway, like I said, that was just mostly a comment because I get really frustrated, especially, trying to tell people that, they're being scammed. As far as successes, I haven't seen a lot of successes personally because in my current role, we don't do those investigations. We don't do a lot of it because it doesn't, it's not in our jurisdiction. So, but, when I was with the Bureau, of course, I mean, it was when cryptocurrency, it was when it was very new. I'm not even sure TRM Labs was around at that time. It was a long time ago when I first got introduced to cryptocurrency. And, I mean, it's like the tech guys, they just went all in and, like made this big investigation and, we did the asset forfeiture for it.
I am excited to get to questions, so I'll kind of keep my wrap up like super short. I thought Cara and Professor Evans said a few things I kind of wanted to amplify a little bit, and that is, I'm getting asked a lot these days about the price of Bitcoin, right? And I have been pretty consistent. I have not cared about the price of Bitcoin when it was going down, and I try not to care about it when it's going up. It probably means that I don't own enough Bitcoin, but it's really because I do believe in the power of this technology beyond it as a speculative investment. I was in Vegas for Money 2020 about a month ago, and it was so cool to see PayPal and Circle and Ripple and Paxos, and then like Stripe had just bought Bridge to use as infrastructure for stablecoins, right? Like we're now seeing stablecoins being used at scale for payments. That is unbelievable from a year or so ago. We're going to get stablecoin legislation in the U.S. in the next year, and I think that's going to create even more clarity for businesses like Circle and others to operate in the U.S. with a license in a super compliant way. We've already seen New York DFS really act as the de facto federal regulator in the U.S. on all of these things. So it's like that's what I'm excited about, right? Seeing this technology used for cross-border payments, and I think we're seeing a lot of that. So I think the stablecoin piece is awesome. Professor Evans talked about tokenization. I kind of agree, right? Like one thing that's really cool to see is post FTX. I think we're really finally seeing financial institutions lean more into the space and talk about offering crypto assets, talking about potentially funding liquidity pools, and then tokenization. I agree with you completely that today the only thing that's been tokenized in a meaningful way is U.S. dollars. But I think we're gonna see more, and I'm excited about that. And I think regulatory frameworks will help there. So super bullish on the growing ecosystem, and it has nothing to do with the price of Bitcoin. On successes, like yes, right. When there are tools and training, we're seeing law enforcement do a tremendous job of using tools like TRM to track and trace the flow of funds to potentially even seize them back. I post on LinkedIn every single Friday an example of law enforcement using these tools and regulators globally using these tools, getting wins from them. And I think there's so many great case studies. I think the challenge is there's just not enough folks with access to these tools and the training to do it at scale to get every pig butchering case, right? You're still always talking about thresholds that Val talked about, right? You got to get over a certain amount in order to get law enforcement interested. So I think we're getting there. Every agency is going to be able to do this globally. But it's really exciting to see what's happening all over the world. I joke about my travels all the time, but I was in Singapore 2 weeks ago, and it's just so cool to see, you know, to meet with regulators globally at the FinTech Festival. I mean, it's so cool to see what everyone's working on. And quite frankly, finally, after a long time, it's like I have a chance to say, hey, look, this is what we're actually seeing some movement over the last few weeks on in the US. So I'm super excited. You know, check out those wins because I think they're very meaningful. They're certainly meaningful for law enforcement and something that we can build on. But I am going to shut up because I think
Ari,
the
I have a
audience
couple of
questions are the
wins I
best
wanted
part
to
of these. I
I
love
wanted
it.
to
Let's
throw
go
in
some wins. All right.
couple
I
just
love wins.
the wins that it hasn't come up yet, but just talking about what's going on in terms of the third branch of government, the judiciary. You know, I always say, unless and until Congress acts, these legislative creatures known as the agencies are left with their empowering organic legislation to kind of give them the framework, and they're left through enforcement, but also rulemaking. Knock, knock, knock. SEC. You know, you have a number of tools in the toolbox of what we've seen out of the SEC has certainly been enforcement, right, on a case-by-case basis. And what the industry always complaining or being concerned about is the absence of rulemaking for all regulated parties instead of one-offs, one by one, where we're left to read the tea leaves. And I think, you know, the industry got tired of that, waiting on Congress to act. And what is left is the judicial branch, where now companies are going on the offensive, right? So we have from Ripple Labs. I love, you know, I think it's a long awaited win in that regard for XRP. And we've seen what started to happen for them, not for that token, not just because of what I think is the buoying effect of the BTC price marching towards like this $100,000 wall, but also just in its own right with greater investor confidence. We have Grayscale. Coinbase has been on the offensive for sure. The Bitnomio Labs, that's a really interesting case as well, and certainly Binance. So what the kind of patiently wait, come in and let's talk it may work in other jurisdictions. It did not work here in the United States. And so seeing those go on the offensive have been really, really interesting.
I am so glad you did that. That was exactly what I was. This is why, you know, I'm not as good a moderator as everyone thinks, Brian. That was literally the answer to the question that I was trying to get when I asked you about like the legal landscape.
Oh, I was
but
like,
you
I
got
want
to
talk
it.
about
You got
this.
to it. That's why I set it
Okay.
up. I set up the regulation part, and then I was like, oh, give me the courts, right? Yeah. Anyway, that was great. I'm glad you got to it.
Look
Yeah.
at that.
That was a really awesome answer. Thank you.
Okay, so
Yeah.
to the members of the audience, Jason, Palessa, Precious, Lawal, you know, Cosmos, Abdul Jabbar, any of you who have a question, please? You can just unmute yourselves.
Sports, musical theater, running. We do it all here. Pop culture.
Go Eagles. Go Eagles. Excuse me.
Okay, cool. So if nobody has a question, literally, I'm gonna. Oh, okay, there is a question. There is a question. Lawal has a question. Lawal, please unmute yourself. And I think Abdul Jabbar. Actually, Lawal, just wait. Abdul Jabbar, your mic is live. You want to ask your question, please? Abdul Jabbar? Okay, Lawal, please proceed then. Unmute yourself. I'm clicking on you to unmute, please.
Okay. Can you hear me, please?
Sorry.
Hello. There is a mix-up. Let me unmute my mic. Let me unmute my.
Okay, tell you what, I'm gonna mute everybody's mic, okay? And then whoever's speaking can unmute theirs, okay? Okay, cool. Lawal, unmute yourself, please. And let's be time conscious because our panelists have to attend to other things as well.
Okay, thank you very much for having me to ask a question. My name is Lawal Mukhtar from Nigeria. I have been following and I have been, you know, very attentive to the discussion. First of all, I will appreciate the organizers, and the speakers. While I couldn't help but notice the absence of professionals from the stakeholders in the African, side. Considering that blockchain is a borderless technology and regulatory and compliance issues are very cross-geopolitical in nature, I believe involving African experts will add balance and diversity to the conversation. As an African, also a participant from Nigeria, I think our unique challenges and experiences, could reach discussions like this. Perhaps this could be considered in the future sessions.
Yes, Lawal.
Secondly,
and I'm from Africa as well. Does it not count, Lawal? Come on, man.
Sorry for that. I forgot. Yes, I have a question. Lastly, for some.
Yeah, sorry guys. The networking from our Nigerian colleagues is always off. So who's ready with the question, please? We literally have to wrap up. Nova, you want to ask your question? Because I saw you wrote it down. We'll take your question and one other question, and then we'll do the takeaways and just wrap it up.
Hello, how you doing? I just wanted to ask a quick question in terms of are there any independent Web3 oriented regulatory firms existing today? And if not, the possibility of having that happen, and we can take action of aggregating all this existing regulatory protections into like one single document and having a global agency developed around that document itself. So is that existing? And if not, can that happen?
No, but that's a great question. And you had another great question in the chat too that I was trying to get to at one point, but I can go back and look there too. I think the short answer to your question is there are global standard setters in a whole bunch of facets that take on sort of a lot of these issues. When you're talking from a pure financial crime compliance standpoint, you're talking about FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, which has been putting out crypto guidance for at least the last decade or more, very, very early on. So that's definitely a good place to look when you're talking about financial crime. IOSCO is the equivalent for securities regulation and administrators. They also have put out all kinds of standards. So if you're talking about sort of standard setters, right? Those who are making recommendations of various strengths to regulators in different jurisdictions, you have that today. The BIS, there's a handful of these types of organizations. If what you're talking about is a global regulator of some kind, my answer is no. You will never see that. We don't have global regulators for anything, and certainly not this. I think the best hope that you have is consistent regulation to develop, and that's why those standard setters actually become really important. Someone was talking about the mutual evaluation, I think on this call, maybe not for FATF. About a lot of calls. I actually don't think it was this one. That's coming out, that'll come out this year for certain countries. Crypto will obviously play a role there. There's going to be kinds of conversation, but you'll never have global regulation, but there are certainly standard setters that have come out with recommendations for regulators. Is that helpful?
That is helpful. I do appreciate it. We should point ourselves in that direction, though.
Thanks, Ari. Now, I guess there's no other questions because the network in Nigeria is really horrible. So I know we've done kind of like a soft takeaway, but now let's do the actual takeaway. And, you can also give a link to where we can find you, your LinkedIn, your website, whatever products you have that would be of interest to the audience. And this recording will be live, will be on our YouTube as well. And some of our people always go to watch back the episodes. So it's going to be easy for people to track you as a person and your products as well. So, Cara, Adilah, we could start. Literally, it's open season. Anyone can start. Yeah.
I'll kick it off. Well,
Yeah.
the big takeaway here is in general with the scams and the leading up to the environment build out of Web3 and how everyone is internalizing it in their respective regions. Everybody needs to practice proper handling with this technology. Amongst those who are already involved in the technology, they should be utilizing wallet management services and skilled professionals before they make a decision to invest. And also, with that being said, I feel that given the regulations that are getting ready to pass in the United States, I feel that that's going to help offset some of the concerns that everyone has with still doing business with crypto. So I think that we're in a good space right now, and it's just important for everybody, even myself and anyone on the panel, to be aware of, I guess, educating ourselves with other risks that may be involved with doing business outside of our continental US.
Thanks, Adilah. Cara?
Thank you, guys. And again, great panel and really, really great spending time with you all. I would start by saying, to Ari's point, it is paramount to separate the price of Bitcoin from the value of blockchain. To Nick's point, crypto is merely the medium or the vessel of illicit activity, not the means. It is the people and the bad actors behind that, and the intelligence needs to build around that. Crypto is just the mechanism, and it is in fact demonstrated here, more forensic. Yes, we're probably seeing more crimes and hearing more crimes reported than we even would in potential fiat or able to trace them. And then I would say the future is bright for digital assets. And then as pertains to policy and legal frameworks, yes, blockchain is borderless, but no, beware of the jurisdictional nuances, and beware also to the point that Adilah made about, there's a lot of jurisdictional arbitrage going to be going on, right? There's a lot of competing factors, competing jurisdictions now, and that's going to play into it. So hasten with caution, mind your risk, and mind the victim.
Thank you, Cara. Val?
My takeaway is we're going to have a lot of regulatory changes within the next year. Hopefully it won't be at a snail's pace. For the investigator side, I hope it's more things that will help me, and other forensic investigators, in our job as far as helping to make, the crypto digital currency space a safe, ecosystem for everyone.
Thanks, Val. Dr. Evans, please.
Okay, so I hope first of all, I learn so much every time I'm on these calls. And so this proves, even for us we are considered by others certainly to be expert, there's literally something to learn every minute of every day. And so ABL, always be learning, as the young folks don't say. I don't know who says that, but please do always be in the process of learning. So I hope that this conversation definitely has you critically thinking about your role and the role that you play. And I'm always going to double down on education, but at the professional level in particular. So for corporate leaders, you're monitoring the cases that I mentioned. They are redefining how companies operate in the crypto space, and then how that's connected to legislation that may come. Also pay attention to not just what's going on at the federal level, but also at the state level, particularly in a republic such as in the United States. Most things percolate up from the states until there's kind of a tipping point. We passed some interesting legislation in the Pennsylvania House, and we have a strategic assets reserve assets, bill that was just introduced. There will be a lot going on in Pennsylvania. So just by way of example, so be prepared to engage with regulators proactively to avoid litigation, but don't be afraid for the fight for a definition in the space, because it's the most valuable resource that we have is not just Bitcoin and the number go up crowd, but it's also time. we've lost a great deal of time here in the States as others continue to march forward. I have great visions for CARICOM and other places and spaces around the world that are moving more nimbly and more proactively and actually leading us rather than the other way around. So it's an interesting turn of events, and I think it is a beneficial one. And then just a final point to my lawyers, understanding the legal strategies that are used in the cases mentioned, helping clients to navigate, not being afraid of not just issue spotting, but the problem solving where things are not resolved is actually not only exciting and daunting, but necessary. So this is not a nice to have, it's a need to have. I want you to lean in and go to the head of the class. And with that, I turn it back to you.
Yo, big up, Professor Evans. Yo, Ari, now
Yeah.
back to you.
We're gonna wrap it up. I spend my whole life talking about how to mitigate illicit finance risks within the crypto ecosystem, right? But my kind of organizing principle around this is because we're building something that matters, right? That's why we have to stop bad guys from engaging with it. So when we can talk about so many of these great issues and the things that people are building, like that's my favorite opportunity. That's why I wanted to bring up stable coins and tokenization, and the regulatory frameworks that are coming. I mean, that's the stuff that we're all protecting by trying to stop bad guys from taking advantage of great technology. But I also always want to point out that like we shouldn't overstate the financial crime problem, right? At TRM, we talk about it as about 0.6% of all illicit activity on chain, of all activity on chain is illicit. That means about under 1%. That means that the overwhelming amount of activity is lawful. And what we want to do is we want to stop bad guys to the extent possible to allow lawful users to engage with technology. And that's the way I'm always thinking about things in this space. That's what we're building at TRM. But always important to have the perspective of what's actually happening using blockchain technology when we talk about scams, when we talk about fraud, when we talk about illicit activity. And as much as it breaks my heart to say, there's always going to be scams and fraud in any financial system worth engaging with, right? If bad guys aren't using it, probably it's because there's not enough activity in it overall. Our job is not to stop illicit actors from using it. It's to mitigate the risk to the extent possible. And that's what we're kind of, that's the job we're all in together for this group and for the sort of broader community.
Thank you so much, Ari. Now, I just want to thank everybody. Yo, our panelists held it down. Literally, like, yo, I was learning, everybody's learning, we're learning from each other. Like, yo, like, y'all held it down, and I'm so happy. You know, Cara, Adilah, Valencia, Dr. Evans, Nick, Keniel, Ari, man, you've been a true star, man. And thank you for accepting to co-host as well. And I know all of you have terribly busy schedules, American pronunciation schedules. And I'm so grateful that you came through for us. And
Brian, thank you to you, other AKA the Pied Piper, who brings people together.
Brought everybody
so
together.
much.
Yeah,
Yes.
yo, literally, I'm so grateful. And you know, we can't bang on the importance of education, even like, you know, like we keep singing this every day at Blockchain Lex, and we have to spread the knowledge. It's the only way that the future can progress. So thank you so much. And this is going to be at the top of one of our educational pieces as well, because this has been so, so good. And on behalf of the CryptoMondays Caribbean and Africa community, some of the attendees are here. You know, we are grateful for everything. And members of the audience who are part of our communities, thank you for coming and setting aside your time. We shall see you on the next one, and hopefully we shall see you in the actual real live one in Barbados in January. So let's, you know, just keep your eyes peeled, and thank you so much. Big up everybody, big up yourselves. Mad love. Talk later. All right.
Big up